Hello, this is a short video to cover the options within Seraphim Future for including or excluding wells. I'm going to cover four things. First of all, a quick way of excluding wells by disabling them or by disabling their parent nodes. Then I'll cover the normal system of using selection of projects to be included in a forecast for systematically including wells in some forecasts but not in others. Then I'll cover the options for excluding wells for some specific scenarios. It could be the case that your well might have no profile for in the low scenario. And finally, I'll cover the other settings that can be used to set the well to have zero flow rate. Normally one wouldn't use these, one would use one of the other options, but they can be useful if, for example, it's a shut-in well that will be brought in through a workover. Okay, so first of all, the quick way of excluding a well is simply to go to Edit the Well, Edit Well, select a well, and then untick the enabled. And what you'll see there is that particular well is now, when I find it down here, is disabled. If you want to apply it to a whole group of wells, you can edit the wells using a table. You only need to select one scenario because it's a common property across all the scenarios, and then one can similarly set them all to be disabled, and you've disabled those wells. You can also disable nodes, and if you disable a node, then so if I'm going to edit platform 1, then everything below it will also be ignored, and you'll see those wells will also be marked here in the well approval manager. If you've got the option display disabled wells for strikeout, you'll see that they're also disabled. And enabling is reversing the process. And here we can put everything back. So those are the quick ways for excluding a well from a forecast. And you would typically use those if you wanted just a quick calculation of part of your network. The more normal situation that you want to include wells in some forecasts but not in others, then you would use the option of forecasts, scenarios and projects to define which wells you want included in which forecast. For example, in your 2P reserves forecast, you wouldn't want to include contingent wells, but in your mid-case reserves and contingent resources forecast, you would want to include them. So recapping briefly, for this what you want to do is you want to define an appropriate set of projects, which are groupings of the wells. And you can use the project groupings if you want to have multiple projects that are in a common category. You assign the wells to the appropriate projects, and then when you come to defining your forecasts, you make a selection for a given forecast, such as 2P reserves. You say, I'm going to be using the medium properties, the medium well potentials, and then I'm going to be using my developed producing wells. Here, developed non-producing, it's grayed out because there aren't any wells in that group. And we also want to have the undeveloped approved, undeveloped justified, but we don't want to have the contingent. So that's the normal way of selecting which wells should be included and excluded from which forecasts. Sometimes you may have a situation that a particular well should be considered to have it should be considered to have some reserves for in the middle case, but in the low case you might think, well, given the uncertainties, we'll count it as nothing. For this, one can choose the option within the well approval manager of right-clicking on the reserves number and then exclude from calculations, and then you'll see that the relevant columns to do with the low scenario have got this red thing, and then that well won't be incorporated. The low thing will be set to, it'll always be disabled. If you want to, another option, finally, I'd like to cover briefly the settings in the well that can cause it to have no flow and to contribute nothing. If you set the well uptime to 0, or indeed the parent uptime in its node, any of its parent nodes, you'll get no resultant flow. If you set constraints to 0, again you will get no flow. But again, take note that you have to do this for all the scenarios. Another point to note is that setting the maximum liquid rate, take care that that maximum liquid rate may be used for your, if you're using a decline model, then the maximum liquid rate is the one, and you're choosing a from rate and pressure constraints single decline curve, then that maximum liquid rate is the one used in the decline chart. So here, if we change it to, say, 100, we'll see our decline curve changes. Okay. So that's a brief summary of the options for including or excluding a well from your forecasts.